Well, hello everybody, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining our second IATI virtual community exchange. I'm delighted to see so many new and old faces in this virtual room. First things first, all of the VCE sessions today have simultaneous English, French, and Spanish interpretation. So if at any time you need interpretation, please click the interpretation button on the bottom of your Zoom panel. We would also please ask you to ensure your Zoom display name is showing your full name and organization, so we are able to see all the diversity and expertise in the room. My name is Melinda Kusner. I have the technical seat at the IATI Governing Board, and I'm the IATI manager at SIDA Sweden. I'm actually an IATI dinosaur, and I've been a transparency enthusiast since 2019. So it gives me great pleasures to be moderating today's opening session, during which we will hear from a variety of inspiring speakers about the current state of open data and transparency in the light of Sustainable Development Goals and the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as our community's role in ensuring IATI achieves its ambitious aim of providing open and transparent data on development and humanitarian resources for more informed and accountable decision-making. I think this is going to be my 8th community event. These events have always been the highlight of the year, giving important insight into the broader IATI work, the possibility to network and give energy to keep on the struggle for greater transparency. And actually, I found from the last virtual community exchange that even if we weren't able to meet in person, the virtual forum still allowed for a lot of the above, even the networking. So don't be shy to contact another participant who you think might be interesting to chat with. And to get the conversation started, let's start off the session with a bit of an interactive icebreaker. We've set up a brief poll to wake everybody up and kick off the session. The polls are completely anonymous, and you can only choose one option. But as the Secretary has presented the questions, and the question is, what motivates you joining the VCE today? Is it fun to find out more about what this IATI thing is all about? Is it to learn more about the progress IATI is making and how it can get involved? To hear more about the state of open data and transparency from the awesome speakers? To network with my peers and catch up with colleagues? To present my own work? Or honestly, my boss asked me to. So feel free to choose one of the answers. All right, we have quite a few answers coming in already. Great. And I'm glad to see there's not very many people who are forced here by their boss. Mostly are here to more about the state of open data and transparency. That is really great to hear, and that you sure will do. Now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Henry Assor from the Ministry of Finance of Nigeria. He is also the Vice Chair of the IATI Governing Board, and he will officially welcome you all to the VCE number 2.
Thank you, Melinda. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Henry Assor Nkan, Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Abuja, Nigeria. As Vice Chair of the IATI Governing Board, allow me to welcome you all to this session, second edition of the IATI's Virtual Community Exchange. Whether you are an experienced member of our community or a relative newcomer to IATI, your input and active engagement during these 2 conference days is invaluable to the work of our great initiative. Therefore, I am delighted to see that so many colleagues from civil society, academia, and government institutions have registered for this opportunity to engage and exchange. It marks our joint commitment to transparency, open data, and effective development cooperation, which is now more important than ever. In our efforts to build back better from the economic and social after effects of the global pandemic, we believe that increased availability and transparency of development data is essential in improving the coordination, accountability, and effectiveness of development resources. Towards this direction, IATI is playing its part. By mid-2021, IATI data was available on nearly 15,000 development and humanitarian COVID-19 related activities. Moreover, we aim to increase the accessibility of our data, for example, by launching innovative tools such as the Country Development Finance Data Tool, which was designed in close consultation with partner country stakeholders. Over the course of today and tomorrow, we members of the IATI community will hear more important updates. It is an opportunity for all of us to discuss, debate, and share information on our own publishing and use of IATI data, learn about where IATI is making progress and where challenges remain, but also better understand how we can collectively work together to achieve the goals we have set for ourselves in our ambitious 5-year strategic plan. Thank you again for joining us. Welcome. I hand over to Melinda.
Thank you so much, Henry, for this warm welcome to the second VCE. We will now meet our keynote speaker, Ulrika Modéer. She's Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy at UNDP. She will provide some framing remarks on how open, transparent data is helping the international community to build back better from the COVID-19 and IATI's role in a resilient recovery. As we're both from Sweden, I will take the opportunity to welcome her in Swedish. God morgon, Ulrika. Over to you.
God morgon, Melinda, and good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all of you. And yes, certainly we should perhaps not build back because the societies we came from were not really sustainable societies, but build forward. And in order to do that, we need to enable all people of the world. We have promised not to leave anyone behind to realize their full potential in life. And this requires action, and action requires information. We know, and we discussed this in so many different events, and also UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, doing the socioeconomic assessments across the world and looking at countries and communities really falling behind now. The data is power. And we know that a basic condition for achieving our collective development aims laid out in the Sustainable Development Goals, but also in the national development plans that are now for many governments really difficult to realize. The use of data and measurement to better coordinate, but also cooperate and to work together to address today's most pressing development challenges and make better decisions is really needed. So the push for more and also better data is really critical at a time when the world is going in reverse instead of really moving forward in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. But this reversal, as we see now, is not inevitable at all. Actually, the funds are there if we do the right investments right now. So hence, even more of importance that we really inform the discussions through data, but also transparency, and make sure that people around the world can also hold decision makers to account. Bold and urgent action is really needed to achieve the SDGs, to help both people and planet. We have the Biodiversity Summit just starting up. It's needed to make the world prosper and to recover the ground that we have lost, and that countries and communities still lose, as the socioeconomic crisis that has accompanied the pandemic still evolves in many countries and will linger on for many, many years. And I believe that development cooperation in these times, while we all wish for a world perhaps beyond the traditional ODA, where countries and communities have their own means of also coordinating and cooperating for the achievement of the global goals. Right now, development cooperation, the traditional ODA, is really one of our most valuable but also greatest assets in the war against COVID-19. And as an international community, our ability to work together will really be critical to overcome the challenges posed. And with these overwhelming needs that we see, the effectiveness of the response and the spending will matter even more to see to that we can maximize the impact of official development assistance, these scarce resources that we have when we see also other development finance flow really fading out. So of course, then with good quality, open and transparent data and a multi-stakeholder fora like IATI at the core of our efforts, then we can do so much more. I really think that the work we're doing here together should be put at the forefront, and UNDP is certainly one of the UN agencies making sure also that that happens. So really what we need is a combination of evidence-based and informed policy choices and investments, both in governance, in social protection, in the green transition that needs to happen at the same time. We have the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis also accompanying countries and communities. And we need robust data on our development and humanitarian activities to see to that we can unlock programs and really invest where needed, and also see how we can use ODA to leverage also development finance and climate finance. So increased availability and transparency of data is really not, and I think we will discuss this today, an end in itself, but it's a key driver, improving the coordination, as I said in the beginning, improving the accountability, but also the effectiveness of the spending, and helping then the world to build forward better from the economic and social after effects of COVID. Across the world, governments, multilateral organizations, civil society, and also the private sector and others really need this systematic and relevant data. It needs to be open, it needs to be more accessible. And if that's the case, then it's really one of the most valuable assets that we can have to see to that we get this green, social, economic transformation, and that we support the resilience of communities and countries right now. So members of the IATI community in this virtual room, we represent 1,300 organizations that have published timely and forward-looking data on development cooperation using the IATI standards. And published this way, we can really see to that we can also not work effectively as organizations, but as I said again and again, the importance of effective partnerships and evidence-based policymaking. The data supports positive development outcomes, it enhances service delivery, it prioritizes scarce resources, and it holds also decision makers to account. And this is important in times when citizens also, and this is also something that we have seen as UNDP, as we accompany so many countries, as citizens tend to lose trust in times of crisis. So of course, open access to data also increases the trust in societies. And we know how important trust is to also build well-functioning societies and hopefully give that energy also to really move forward with regard to processes of democratization and participation across the world. During the earliest days of the pandemic, IATI really also proved that it could move swiftly to enable its data support to coordinate relief and allowing data users to also see to that they had the information with regard to development and humanitarian activities, which organizations are funded and implementing activities, how much is budgeted, committed and spent, and so on. And by the middle of 2021, IATI data was available on nearly 15,000 development and humanitarian COVID-19 related activities. And this is of course a huge asset, and thanks to all of you who have really made this happen. It demonstrates that members of the IATI family really has an incredible power of development if we do this together in a good way. And the UNDP is of course proud to be an IATI member as well as the coordinator of the Secretariat. But having said this, and I'm rounding up now, Melinda, we can go so much further. I'm really pleased to see that there are many new faces in the room today, and really also recognize the old hands that have contributed to the success of IATI, bringing us together since its birth in Accra in 2008. And my ask to all of you, data publishers and users, transparency advocates, it's really to recommit your organizations to development cooperation, to transparency, and also to IATI. This will only be more important in the future. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. Of course, the sustainable development goals, but also the trust that need to form that energy, making communities and countries come together, but also the international community. So I really look forward to engage with all of you today and also listen in to what's happening the following days and see to that we can move forward. And certainly UNDP will stay fully committed to see to that we also are a leader in the area of transparency, open data. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you, Ulrika. Very inspiring and informative comments. And thank you also for bringing up the fact that it's not enough to go back to where we are. We need to build forward and make better than it was before. And we can't do that in silos. We have the environment and the people are in working together, and we have to work on all levels to reach better life conditions for everybody and to achieve the SDG goals. And I also like what you say about the having the data there to make informed decisions, and also as a trust factor, so that we know that we are achieving the goals and that the funds are received where they are needed. So with this essential framing for moving, we'll move us into the next panel discussion around the current development and effectiveness conversation post-COVID-19 and the role of transparency, open data, and IATI itself. I would like now to introduce our esteemed panelists, who will each give a short opening remark, and participants, please do feel free to ask any comments or questions to the panelists in the Zoom chat box. And now I would like to welcome Shaida Badiee, Managing Director of Open Data Watch, Olivier Thereaux, Head of Research and Development, Open Data Institute, and Papa Seck, Chief of the Research and Data Section of UN Women. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Melinda, do you want me to go first?
Yes, Shaida, please.
Okay. Any of the questions that you have in mind for me?
Yes. Well, we have some questions here. And how is the development effectiveness conversation changing in the face of the SDGs and the COVID-19 pandemic? Is the role of transparency, open data, and/or evidence-based decision-making changing? How and why?
Well, thank you. Thanks, first of all, for inviting me to this amazing gathering, and really pleased to be here. I am one of the old timers that have seen the IATI grow and when it was set up in Accra in some years back. I don't remember exactly when, but I've seen it, how it has grown and how it has really changed the landscape for aid effectiveness and transparency around the aid effectiveness, and bringing users together to discuss aid effectiveness around that standard. So congratulations to IATI, and thank you for doing the hard work for all of us. Now, to your question now, how is the development effectiveness conversation changing in light of SDGs and COVID-19? First of all, I think SDGs really, and also the challenges that we've been facing with COVID-19 has shown us that we need to focus on a holistic approach to aid effectiveness and measuring effectiveness, development effectiveness, much more holistic, meaning that we have to, look at all sides, from socioeconomic and from, from environmental and sustainable development, and really look at building a very important foundation for information systems so that is resilient and is strong, and it can respond to changing needs and to especially needs in time of crisis. So one of the things that I've seen the conversation is changing with SDGs and also with the COVID-19 pandemics we've been dealing with is really this need for strong, holistic, and sustainable systems that must have a strong foundation. The other thing that I've seen really changing in the past, I would say 15 years, and particularly recently through COVID, is the demand for data and for better data, and demand for trusted sources of data is much higher than I have ever seen it. And I think that's really partly due to the transparency initiatives and also to the efforts of many, including my own organization, but many others who have been advocating for open data, and countries and agencies for making their data openly accessible without fees, without any barriers. So that has been tremendous. But with it also, I see that importance of data literacy is really improved, and paying more attention to data literacy, because with right after transparency and open data comes data use and making data to make a difference and make an impact. And for that to happen, and one of the enabling environments that we all need to really pay attention to around the aid effectiveness and development effectiveness is data literacy, so that there are more people are empowered and more countries, more agencies empowered to use the data. And along that, I've seen one of the big changes is the importance to quality data and timely data. So that in that sense, one of the items that we see changing in the effectiveness conversation is people want much more timely data than ever before. And therefore, the alternative data sources and being able to mix data is very important. And finally, one of the big other things that I see changing, and is really changing for good, is that there are more, as the landscape for data is expanding and more sources of data coming into play, but so is also more of stakeholders. And I see that the communities of partners and communities of civil society organizations like myself are all involved in the data revolution and making the development effectiveness conversation much smarter and much better based on data. So I see it overall changing a lot, but and changing in a good way. But I also see, if I may say, that there are things that are not going in the right direction. And one of the things that's really breaks my heart is that capacity of countries to deal with data and transparency of data and use of data is not improving as much. And if you look behind it, is largely because of the financing. There's not enough. 92% of the countries that we just recently, through a survey by the World Bank, UNSD, and Paris 21, it shows that 92% of the countries do not have the resources needed to have a strong statistical system. So the capacity of the countries is not changing due to the financial support. And if you look at behind the financial support, you see that there is still a lot of improvements that we need to make in harmonizing aid towards data. So we do need to have a better way smarter way of financing data and building stronger systems to support countries. I stop here, but I'm happy to elaborate on any on this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And Olivier, I was wondering if you want to pick up from there. And,
I would love to.
Yes.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you, Shaida, for your opening remarks. They're really insightful, and I do indeed want to build on that. First, quick introduction. My name is Olivier. I'm working at an organization called the Open Data Institute, a non-profit based out of the UK, working on creating a more trustworthy and open data ecosystem. So very much related to today's topic, and I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me. This is my first community exchange, and I am, unlike Shaida, much of a IIT newbie here. But I wanted to share with you some thoughts which will echo a lot of what Shaida was saying, but I'm going to try and make it into an optimistic message, in that as someone who, within my organization, has been looking at the state of data and the state of open data for a long time now, I could go with a pessimistic view that indeed, as Shaida was saying, the momentum, the investment, the skills for open data, especially in governments, is not as high as we would have wanted, given that we've had more than a decade of an open data movement, more than a decade of institutions like IATI, more than a decade of exemplars in a number of countries really doing good work around open data. I was a couple of years ago touring a number of countries and governments and talking to them about their approach to open data. And I was sensing a real shift in how the perspective was, from a perspective of transparency for its own sake, a perspective of open data for its own sake, to a bit of a existential questioning about what do we do with open data? What is open data for, and what are we doing with it? Some countries were shifting to much more of an innovation focused approach. Others were looking inwards and thinking open data is a way to increase the effectiveness of the machine of government. And then came COVID, and what I want to share with you today is early days observations about what I think is a pretty massive paradigm shift that COVID has created. And by that I mean that, in the same way as Ulrika was saying, that the importance of data, that importance of information, is as a way for us to make better decisions, as a way for us to create positive outcomes. The landscape has shifted a lot at the beginning of COVID, where, unlike in 2019, where the landscape of open data was largely that of governments and agencies publishing open data and hoping that it would be useful, and sometimes with some good ecosystems already built up, but in largely, and I'm not talking about IATI here, but more broadly, there was a build it and they will come type approach. Let's put out open data, and hopefully someone's going to use it, and hopefully that transparency is going to have a positive impact. Shift to 2020, 2021, and we've got a different thing where, and that's something that I want to pick up on that Ulrika said, that there is a need for evidence-based policy. And that means that the states and the governments are not only publishers and issuers of open data, they're also consumers now. And that creates completely different roles for everyone in the ecosystem, from the public sector, the private sector, the third sector, whereby rather than that notion that we're going to put out open data and the other people are going to perhaps at some point use it, we've got a much more challenge-based, and that's why I think the SDGs are absolutely amazing way to focus our energies, because they are a vector for our energies, a vector for our collaboration. That means that we have now collaborations where, for instance, the private sector can be the ones holding important data that can really influence better policy decisions. So we have seen it in a few countries during the pandemic, or at least from the early days of the pandemic, that corporations, typically quite adverse to the notion of sharing or even opening data for public purposes, they actually came to people like us at the ODI or to government, say, we have data about things like mobility. We have data about high street purchases. And we think this is something that's going to help you, public health authorities, governments, policymakers, to make those better decisions. And that completely upended the whole pipeline of publishing open data and consuming it to much more of an ecosystem of data sharing and open data. But that comes with a lot of challenges. As Shaida was saying, it requires, for this to work, it requires a lot of collaborations, it requires a lot of skills, it requires a whole ecosystem to be built. Because if it's not just the agencies publishing open data, but instead the governments being consumers and publishers, and the third sector and the private sector being themselves publishers and consumers of data, then we need much more collaboration. And I think institutions like IATI can be exemplars of how things like standards and tools can be developed to enable that kind of community. I will stop here, but I think I've put forward a positive and at least optimistic message that there has been massive change in the landscape of data and open data, and it's going to be a big challenge for us to work in this new ecosystem. But I'm quite hopeful that we'll get a much broader ecosystem and a much broader set of actors working in this domain and publishing and using data for positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And we would also like to welcome Papa Seck. Welcome, Papa Seck.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Just greetings to all. It's really a pleasure joining you today. I think, again, this is really an important conversation and something that I think, all of us really can learn from. We've seen that, over the last, I would say 5-6 years, the development effectiveness conversation has, in the face of the SDGs, and during the pandemic in particular, has been changing. And for so long, many have thought that, of data as an input, but in the SDGs era, I think, we're seeing growing recognition that data is a policy issue in and of itself. And the World Bank's latest report, the World Data Development Report, actually makes a strong case for that. And so that essentially, even if we look within the UN system, the recognition in the with the UN Secretary General's recent data strategy. In 2016, we at UN Women did make a conscious effort to step up our statistical work to support SDGs monitoring and to inform countries' policies to achieve gender equality. And the results have been really strong. We've contributed to an improvement in SDGs data availability, but also our work has resulted in several policy advances that directly address SDGs priorities. We've seen, sexual harassment laws in Georgia, the creation of rape crisis centers in Albania, national care policies in Colombia, Bangladesh, Kenya, and several others. And during the pandemic, we've also stepped up our effort to ensure responsiveness to the expressed needs for new and the latest data on the impact of COVID-19. We've collaborated with several national partners, international agencies, civil society, and private sector. And since April, we've conducted over 70 rapid assessment surveys, worked with agencies to compile indicators. With UNDP, we've collected data on policies that governments are taking to monitor the pandemic. And why this is important? Not only, as I said, we are seeing clear policy uses for this data. We're also making this data accessible to all in a really open fashion, including through detailed analysis, dashboards, and even the microdata files from the surveys are publicly available. And what we're seeing is that more organizations are using this data for research and advocacy, which definitely helps to get new insights, increase advocacy, and spread the word. But beyond producing data, I think it's also important to know how, if and how that data are being used. So we're collecting data on data use cases. For example, we've seen new policies in Chile, Maldives, Jordan, Senegal, Albania, Colombia, all as a result of the rapid gender assessment. And how we find out is really through by making a conscious decision to actually collect data on how data is being used. And as a community, I think we must all promote increasing the value of open and transparent data by ensuring that they are accessible and used. But data use shouldn't be an afterthought, and we need to really, put that in the forefront. So, for instance, what we are doing is that we're shifting our perspective from data production to data use, and meaning that when we start a data collaboration with countries or with agencies, the first thing that we try to do is really identify what are the information needs, what are the intended uses in order to design our data collection to do that. And this is in line with UN's broader approach to data. And nearly a decade ago, we were the 100th agency to publish with IATI. And we also launched our open data website at that time, which we are currently revamping. We think that openness of data builds trust, whether it is with governments, donors, civil society, international organizations, private sector or private sector, and it makes it more likely that data will be used and reused and will lead to better outcomes. And we certainly think that this is a good use of aid resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Papa. And I see here that we also have an extra input from Shaida, and a question: if we're meeting the transparency goals that we were committed to in Accra in 2008, you were there, so you followed the line, and how is IATI contributing to the progress in advancing development effectiveness, or not advancing it? What calls of action do you have for the IATI and wider open data and transparency community?
Very simple question. Thanks, Linda. Well, I think that it was a big innovation, this setting up of the Accra action agenda, and I was looking at it just yesterday, and I was thinking to myself, wow, it still makes sense. It was drawn in, I think, 2008, and it still makes sense, and it should be something that it should be revived and maybe slightly get a slight facelift and repackaged. So it's I hope one of the call to actions going forward would be to look at that Accra action plan. And if you remember, it was talking about ownership, meaning that developing countries should set their own strategies. And this was sort of more of a stretch goal. But this is one of the ones that I think good progress has been made, and is due to a lot of groups, including IATI's work. But I think countries, and I don't know if Papa and others would agree with this, but I think the ownership of these issues and development effectiveness and importance of evidence-based policies and importance of transparency and open data, I see that really improved in countries, that they have them in national strategies. Now we watch for all the national strategies on all the statistical strategies, and we sort of see how that conversation is actually increasing. So I think on ownership, good things are happening. On alignment, donor countries aligning behind international goals, I think the SDGs have really helped becoming a good framework for alignment. And of course, there's much more room to improve, but the alignment at least has a framework. But I think IATI and also help with DAC and ODA, and particularly with this group, the Global Partnership on Effectiveness for Development Cooperation, GPEDC. It's really a good initiative of bringing everyone together around the table for the alignment around support for SDGs. Harmonization, we see that is a very important goal for donor countries to coordinate and simplify their procedures and share information and avoid duplication. This one, I think, is a huge work in progress and is one of the areas that we could really improve. And we need more of information brokerage around harmonization to be able to facilitate that. And tomorrow we are in one of the other sessions. Tomorrow we're showing the audience a new platform that we have produced called Clearinghouse for Smarter Financing for Development Data, as an example of a platform that could really help between demand and supply coordination and alignment. Then we have two more targets for the ACRA action plan. One is on results, meaning everybody line up and keep an eye on the results. And the other one is mutual accountability. And I think those two are also work in progress. And those are there've been some good progress has been made, but much more I think is needed on both on results and mutual accountability. And SDGs really help us around that. And goal 17 on partnership and keeping an eye on the results is very important. So that's just a few items for going forward. But to your last question on the Melinda, on the IATI, just wanted to add that I think IATI sits on a very important initiative, and as everybody said, there's when you do really well, like IATI has done, you need to do better going forward. So IATI also needs to do much better going forward. Just a few areas. My group helped IATI to do some study on the usage of data and training, and just a few things to share with you. One is that we found that there's huge demand for IATI data, especially for IATI to become sort of a training and helping with the understanding of analysis of the data. But the three key recommendations. One is to have data much more as a complete path from financing to disbursement for analysis and monitoring. The second one is that there's much more need for interoperability. So IATI had its own standards, but it also needs to become much more as a standard for interoperability with other data, so you can use OECD DAC data with IATI data and be able to do analysis. And the third thing is that IATI stuff is complicated. So you need a lot of hand-holding, you need training, you need capacity building, you need literacy, you need help desk and communities like this. So really paying much more attention to the usage of data would be very important. I stop here, Melinda, but again, great work going forward, but lots more for us all to do together to improve this data. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaida. And I like how I'm hearing how all three panelists are bringing up the shift from data production to data use and having the focus on that and moving forward. But then we also have a question here that goes back a little bit to the data in the field. It was written in French, so pardon if I translated this wrong. But when in working with data in the field, what are the conditions in high-risk work, in particular in face of corruption? There we also have a question of data use, but it also goes into data production. So I'm leaving open to any one of the panelists to feel free to answer that one. Yes, Papa.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. This is really an important question. I think it also goes to, really, I think what we face when it comes to data. So usually, one thing that I think I've been talking about lately is basically the political nature of it. right? So we don't always pay attention to it, but it's really important. So, indices can make government fall. So, and we've seen it before where basically indices have come out and really, influence elections or poverty data or and so on. And corruption data is also another thing where basically, some stakeholders, whether it's governments or, a private sector or, whoever it is, may not actually want that information to come out. Collecting that data can also be, sensitive in terms of the methods that you use and so on. So I think for me, what it is that when we are talking about data, I think we also shouldn't forget the political element of it, right? Data, has power. And I think we're increasingly seeing that, whether it's, it's driving conflicts and etc. So I think it's, again, it's something that we should really continue to pay attention to. But I would also add, something that I think, Shaida meant, I think, might have touched on a little bit in her remarks. We are seeing increasing, demands from governments and etc. But what we are not seeing, at least, in the field where I work, is I think it's a little bit of a malalignment of resources also, where there are particular areas, take gender equality, where there's huge demand, but investments are really low. And I think the latest reports by Paris 21, by Data2X, really show essentially the gap that we have in those areas. And that kind of malalignment of resources when it comes to data collection and use can really lead to distorted policies. And I think we really need to pay attention to that.
Thank you, Papa. And that also goes together with the ecosystem that Olivier was talking about, and the importance of good data housekeeping, and also with the interoperability that Shaida mentioned, that to make full use of it, we can bring in and match to other data, and to and also from data from sources that are not the traditional sources in our field. I think it is time to round off the panel discussion. I would like to thank you all for your frank and inspiring comments. This is a great way of kicking off our second VCE. There's so much energy and food for thought that is going to move us forward for the next days. I hear many topics that we'll be bringing up in with the data literacy and responsible transparency, and I also was really keen on bringing up something that Ulrika mentioned as a task for us all. Shaida also said, being good is great, but you need to be better. And it goes together with what Ulrika was giving us as a task to recommit to development transparency and to IATI. Is not to think of this as somewhere a completed process of any kind. There are a lot of challenges ahead, and but moving together, we can go forward strongly, I believe. And I'm also delighted to hear that UNDP will remain committed to IATI, and I hope that that so many being participating here means that this commitment is shared by many participants, both data producers, data users, and everything in between. So we now come to close on the first session of the virtual community exchange. But before everybody moves to their next session, just some quick housekeeping items. For the rest of the 2 VCE days, we would like to have, we will have 3 sessions running concurrently. That means that you're welcome to attend a session from each time slot or pick or choose according to your needs and your calendar. The links to all sessions are included on Shed, which is the interactive online agenda. But if you have a conflict in your schedule, don't worry. All of the sessions will be recorded and shared afterwards. So if you missed something that you really wanted to attend, the session recordings will be up by the end of the week on the digital community platform IATI Connect. So if you haven't already created a file there, a profile there, please do that. It's also a great place to learn from other peers, to hear of their interests, questions, and challenges that might be similar to yours. And if you prefer not to be recorded during these days, please leave your camera and your microphone off. And don't forget to tweet and all that. You can tag IATI at IATI_8 and use the hashtag IATI VCE2 to share your thoughts and experience over the course of the event. The next session will start after the hour of whichever time zone you are in. I'm not gonna guess for everybody, but the links are in the chat box and also on the online agenda. So thank you so much for joining today. And oh, we have a last session. Yes, here we have the next session in the chat box. Thank you for joining and have a great day today and tomorrow. Bye.
Thank
all.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.